Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to the first Cafecito of this semester, Fall 2022. Welcome all to CENTRO. Bienvenidos a todos. My name is Ángel Ruiz. I'm the Arts and Culture Director here at CENTRO. And today we have a very special event for all of you. We were expecting Adrián Viajero Roman to be here with us today, but as many of you know, Adrián has been involved in many efforts in the recovery of Puerto Rico, and he's currently in Ponce, my hometown, and he's having like a lot of, connection problems, so he won't be able to be with us here today. So before we move forward, I want to excuse Adrián, and I'm gonna acknowledge, and send our good vibes to all the people in Puerto Rico who are still recovering from Maria, and then recovering from Fiona, and recovering from all sort of disasters that our people have been through for the last more than 5 years, actually. But that being said, I want to introduce everyone to Marcela Guerrero. Marcela, welcome to Centro. Happy to have you here.
Thank you. So happy to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you for accepting the invitation. We've been working with Marcela about this great exhibition that's coming up at the Whitney Museum of American Art. That's gonna be opening. It's the 23rd of November, right?
Yeah, you got that right. Yeah, November 23rd. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the day before my birthday, so that's like a birthday gift for me. Very excited about it. So Marcela, tell us a little bit about you for the people who do not know who Marcela Guerrero is. What's your trajectory? How did you start, and how did you make it to the Whitney, and what your vision has been ever since you got there?
Okay, sure. Angel, do you want to show the PowerPoint or not yet?
Oh, not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Yeah, so I was born in Puerto Rico, in San Juan. I studied there at the University of Puerto Rico. In fact, and I'm glad that I remember this detail, my study abroad program in 2000 was to study at Hunter. And I worked at El Centro, yeah, when Felix Matos Pelo was a director. So it's rained since then. But yeah, I graduated in 2003. Then I'm a bit of a masochist, so I went to Wisconsin, Madison for grad school. I'm the proud recipient of public education, so I'm very happy and proud about that. So in Madison, I got my master's and then eventually my PhD. And when I was working towards my dissertation writing in that ABD phase, and I thought, I don't think I want to be an academic, but I've already spent monies in what they called segregated fees. Anyway, the fees that you pay when you're just writing your dissertation. So I thought, let me start working and looking for jobs in museums specifically. So I worked at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, under Mari Carmen Ramirez, who's another great Puerto Rican curator. And then I worked there for about 3 years in Houston. So the opposite of Madison, Wisconsin. Then I went to Los Angeles, and I worked at the Hammer Museum on an exhibition called Radical Women. I was a curatorial fellow. And then in 2017, I moved to the Whitney Museum. Yeah. So that's kind of, I've hit all the points in the map.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for sharing that with us. Can you share a little bit about what was your experience at Houston? Because that's such like an important project that, many of us really, really appreciate.
Yeah, so Houston at the MFAH, Mari Carmen started this center called the International Center for the Arts of the Americas. And the main project, I would say, they're known for this project called the Documents Project. So it gathers on their website, on the ICA's website, primary and secondary documents on 20th and 21st century Latin American and Latinx art. So my role there, I was a research coordinator. I was reading and vetting the documents that were coming in, to make sure that they were aligned under these editorial kind of themes that Mari Carmen had established. So anyway, for me, that experience was basically, I was telling someone this morning, in fact, kind of another graduate degree, because my job was just reading documents and learning so much about Latin American, but also Latinx art. And, we had groups of researchers in, I can't remember how many, 14 cities, let's say, across the Americas and the US. And we had one, in fact, in Puerto Rico. We had one in New York, which Libertad Guerra and Yasmin Ramirez were part of. We had one in LA. We had one in Miami, of people gathering documents and sharing them. And so all these documents have been digitized, and they're available for free on the website. So anyone who wants to read about, fill in the blank topic, you can go and check it out. It's super useful.
Yeah, that's a great tool. I have used it many times. A lot of beautiful catalogs that otherwise you won't have access to them. So yeah,
Exactly.
definitely sounds like a great experience. So Marcela, I think it was 2018 when you had your first exhibition at the Whitney, right? Was it 2018 or 2017?
Right. 2018, yeah.
2018. And tell us a little bit about Pacha and how that idea came through.
Yeah, so as I said, I came, I don't want to get too anecdotal, but I came to the museum, I was pregnant. And if anyone needs tips on how to start a job while being 4 months pregnant and disclosing that information to your employer, let me know. But yeah, I came and I pitched that idea, and it's called Pacha Yakta Wasichai, and it was an exhibition, a group exhibition that looked at contemporary Latinx artists whose practice was informed and inspired by indigenous notions of architecture and space from the Americas. And that idea came from, and you more than anyone will understand this, conversations that we have with artists all the time, and feeling that there's a theme in the air, that there's something that artists are gravitating towards. And so I wanted to give it a space for that. And also for some context, before I started the Whitney had Chon Noriega, who's an incredible scholar of media and films, who's Chicanx, and he works at UCLA. He had been an adjunct curator at the Whitney at one point, and he did incredible exhibitions. But the Whitney had never had a Latinx curator and not a Puerto Rican curator. Maybe it's obvious to state that, but I'll say it. And so it kind of marked a transition for the museum. It had just moved to its new location in the meatpacking district. So it was kind of a new chapter for the Whitney of acknowledging many gaps that exist in our collection and in our programming. And so it's a huge responsibility, but one that I'm very happy to kind of lead and have on my shoulders. And so with that notion, I thought, and also I think it's important to say that other curators have had this before. Thelma Golden was a curator at the Whitney, and she gave me this great tip. I mean, I don't think she meant it as a tip, but it ended up being one. And she said that when she did her first show, she wanted to work with artists of her generation. And I thought, okay, this is very smart, because I do have a circle of friends who are thinking about these ideas that I see gravitating or happening in the world, in the air, and they're from my generation. And it also, knowing that so many eyes were going to be on my first show, I thought, well, maybe the right thing right now, it's not for me to do a monographic exhibition of one artist. So let me, with the space that I'm given, how many artists can I have that will be a beautiful representation of their art practice? And so, yeah, I had 7 great artists, and their careers have been, having great moments, which it fills me with joy to see how one exhibition can transform the life of an artist.
That's wonderful. Talking about ideas that have been, on the air for so long. Obviously, Hurricane Maria was this moment that marked all of us, right? The Puerto Ricans in the island, the Puerto Ricans in the diaspora, and artists are usually like the first ones to step in and start digesting, what's going on and kind of wondering, how to transform that into other ways. Was that something that happened with this exhibition? Was that sort of like the genesis of this exhibition, or it was something that you already, been thinking about? How this whole idea of this new exhibition started?
Yeah. I don't think I came to Whitney thinking, oh, I'm going to do a group show of Puerto Rican art, because I don't tend to think in those broad terms. But certainly, as Maria happened, and just seeing, I think the news diet that I was consuming, and I think many of us, was articles on the news, newspapers, images, photographs of the destruction, and I felt, that's great, that's important, that I'm not going to question the labor of journalists, which is super important, but I felt I needed something else. I needed to be able to see that perspective, kind of like, and I'm doing this gesture because it feels to me like it's the other side of those images, like who is on that other side of, which tend to be these images of kind of empty spaces or one sole figure in the distance, in the horizon. And so someone gave me Raquel Salas Rivera's book, Raquel Salas Rivera being a poet who at the time was poet laureate of Philadelphia. And I thought, well, this is incredible. This is what I've been looking for. I need to process this moment through beauty, through poetry, through some kind of artistic bend. I needed to give that to it. Not coincidentally, but later on, we would see during the protests of Verano del 19, the summer of 2019, that's exactly what artists did. They protested in myriads of artistic forms. So that's kind of the how the idea came about, and I thought, and I should mention also, to add a little bit of the history of how the exhibition developed, that in 2019, so I pitched the exhibition to the Whitney after I was on maternity leave when the hurricane happened, came back, pitched the exhibition somewhere between 2017, 2018 might have been. And then in 2019, I brought a group of scholars, 10 women, different generations from Puerto Rico, the archipelago, from the diaspora. Some of them, I call them more closer to the arts, other more kind of arts adjacent. And with them, I started developing more the idea and giving it a little bit more form. And I'll give a shout out to Yarimar, because I remember at that meeting, she said, or someone brought up the phrase "Aquí vive gente," which was a phrase that Brigada Puerta de Tierra used a lot. And Yarimar said, yeah, aquí vive gente, pero aquí también muere gente. Sorry, Babilla, for the switch. So people live here, but people also die here. And so those nuances, that's kind of how the whole exhibition went about, like finding these nuances in the recent history of Puerto Rican art.
I was asking, do you see any connection between this exhibition experience and your first exhibition, Pacha? How are they connected? How do you see that relationship between?
Good question. I don't think explicitly, and even in terms of exhibition design is very different. For Pacha, I gave each artist kind of its own space. I didn't think that those histories that each artist was referencing could be mixed too much. It would lose cohesion, it would lose the meaning of each of the artist's works. But for No Existe, it's the opposite. It's very open. There are 5 themes, but you'll see connections between, you know, a work by Daniel de Jesus in the last theme with, say, a painting by Armig Santos in kind of earlier on the exhibition. So I want that fluidity to be more present. So in many ways, it's different in the thinking of with Pacha, but I did find that I feel very comfortable, and even like comfortable in a weird way. Like, this is very challenging to do a group show, but I love it. And I love it because it's working with artists, it's asking them to trust me, to trust the institution, to see how we can make the best out of their work, and vice versa, how they can make me a better curator. So it's just like a super rich place to be at, and I don't deny it. And I'm sure I'll do a solo show at some point. But I love working with artists, and I can't wait to see how, you know, hopefully this exhibition will be, some of them have great careers, but some of them are kind of a little bit less known, or are younger also. So anyway, I don't know if I see a lot of connections, except that it's a group show.
Okay, cool.
But I would say, Angel, that many of the things that we did for Pacha were learning lessons for No Existe. And so, for instance, for Pacha was the first exhibition that had didactics, meaning the labels or the text translated into Spanish. So that was a huge hill to climb, and I remember having to justify why I wanted bilingual labels for Pacha. I don't have those questions. You know, we, as an institution, we have grown so much in the last 5 years of like, obviously, yeah, we're gonna have didactics in English and Spanish. And not only that, but let's do it also for Eder Hopper, which is a show that's gonna be on the 5th floor. So I love to think about, which is, you know, at the core of your question, like the trajectory, the line, the through line from one exhibition to the next.
Wonderful. That's definitely a contribution, right? And it's an acknowledgement of the community around the museum, and the New York City community itself, right? Because it's very diverse in here. Puerto Rico haven't had like a big exhibition of Puerto Rican art in years, correct me, but the last one I think was 1973, the one that happened at Metropolitan Museum of Art. At least at a large institution, right? So this will be like the first big exhibition on Puerto Rican art in a big institution in the US, like the Whitney Museum of Art. What does this means, you know, after so many years?
Yeah, so, you know, when we say mainstream or major, that has an actual number behind it. So large museums that have an operating budget of, not sure, you know, there's a $1 million number that I can't remember, but from that number up, and also number of employees, endowments. So these are museums like MoMA, Guggenheim, LACMA, the Art Institute of Chicago, Philadelphia Museum of Art. So these like are mainstream museums. Yeah, and the last one was the one that you mentioned, the Metropolitan Museum of Art and El Museo. Obviously, there's been great, fantastic exhibitions in Puerto Rico in what would be major museums there, and also solo shows here and there in the US. But it is the first major scholarly exhibition in a museum of this size, group show also, which for me, that means, you know, I'm interested also in the history of exhibitions, especially when it pertains to Latinx and Latinx artists. I think of exhibitions that are have been important, like MoMA at El Museo, which is another exhibition of that included or showed the works from MoMA at El Museo. But it does raise the question of why can't people go to MoMA to see those works? And you can collaborate with museums and with institutions like we're doing right now, without having to put the onus or the responsibility even in terms of money, or main institutions should be responsible for this content, not just El Museo necessarily. And so yeah, I think that's something very powerful to show that I don't have to necessarily partner with an ethnically specific institution to be able to show this work.
Yeah, that's definitely amazing, and I need to say thank you for taking the lead, right? And I said the lead intentionally because I know this is not just you, right? There's a big group of people working on this exhibition. We talked about this before, but if you can share with us, this collective experience of putting together this exhibition, and who have been your partners. You already mentioned a group of scholars and art adjacent people. I think that's how you call them. But I know that there's much more than that, right? When it comes to translation, when it comes to education, can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, and I think that I'm fascinated by not only the thesis of a show, but everything that you do has kind of a bigger reason, a philosophical reason, and you should imbue that essence into everything that you do. So with this exhibition specifically, I'm thinking of what we call in the field curatorial strategies, like what makes sense for the particular theme of an exhibition. So for this one specifically, because the response after Maria was such a collective impulse that we all saw how people in the diaspora just came together in ways that no government did. No body of any government did. That I wanted to kind of bring that bit of an essence as a curatorial strategy. So even though I don't have time to mention all the names, I wish I had, but the 10 scholars that came and as to that meeting that I mentioned in 2019, we have 20 artists, so it'll be 20 artists in the exhibition, 11 from the archipelago, 8 from the diaspora, and 1 from the diaspora in Europe. And then we have the catalog. There are 11 contributors, 3 of them contributing kind of longer essays, typical essays that you would find in a catalog, and then 8 other contributors writing these short reflections. And these 8 authors are also people who, like the artists, I feel like in the last 5 years had an important platform and brought dialogues that go against the typical cliches that have to do with Puerto Rico. Like it goes, it's outside the cliches of statehood, independence. It's thinking about a future Puerto Rico outside of these very narrow parameters. So on top of that, we have something that I mentioned to you last week, and that I'm so proud that I didn't have to think about it. So this was not my idea. Someone else thought about it, and that was like, this is beautiful. The education department, who leads all the translation efforts and all that process, they had worked with some translators for the biennial, the most recent biennial, but for this show, they said, we want to work with Puerto Rican translators. I'm like, that's great. So we have 2 Puerto Rican translators. We had someone, a journalist who has written a lot about the arts, kind of as someone who helped us when we were, the museum sent people to do some videos. So Mariela Fullana Costa was our person, yes, who helped us there. The book designer, the catalog designer, is also Puerto Rican, Luis Vasquez O'Neill, shout out. See, I started doing the shout outs and I'll never end. And then, and I'm just mentioning a couple of examples that come to mind. One program that we'll have on December 4th, Sunday, December 4th, super excited about this, is a poetry reading that Raquel Salas Rivera is curating. And we'll have 20 or 21. It's a coincidence that it mirrors the number of artists in the show. Will be reading, and it's saying poets from the archipelago, poets from the diaspora. It's going to be a beautiful afternoon on December 4th. So I just want masses of people to be involved, kind of mirroring that idea of what happened, what we saw in the immediate aftermath of the hurricane. And also to kind of, when I say that I'm thinking about it as curatorial strategy, it makes sense in my head because when it comes to exhibitions, and again, kind of solo shows of say Warhol or Pollock, you tend to see these artists in kind of a vacuum, and like the genius prevails and the single authorship is what matters. And I don't want to do that. I'm kind of against that. And yesterday I was talking to Amalia Mesa Baines, because we're doing a program with her related to the Latinx Artist Fellowship. And she was saying the same thing, that and talking about it as something that's very Latinx, of bringing everyone in your realm, bringing your family, whether it's literal or your extended family, into your projects and everything that you do. So kind of going against that single authorship, but at the same time, I do want to be cognizant that it is my responsibility. And, if there's something that someone doesn't, which will be, someone will say, oh, that's not translated correctly, as it always happens. I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm going to point the finger to the translator. That's my responsibility. So I want to be clear about that too.
Great. Thank you for that insightful information. Marcela, before we go, because I know that people are eager to see a preview of what we're going to see on this exhibition, right? And you prepared like a beautiful presentation. There's a question that is very important for me, and I'm sure that it's important for the diaspora in general, right? In these moments and in history, after Black Lives Matter, after many institutions try to kind of, clean their faces with diversity and inclusion, right? In general, I feel like we need to be more proactive in breaking those walls, right? Not just portraying otherness or showcasing the miseries of the underrepresented, as you mentioned, right? Like a lonely person on a big disaster image, but to actually include, right? These peoples and these communities as beneficiaries of whatever the institution do, right? How does this exhibit plan to approach the Puerto Rican diaspora in terms of outreach, in terms of educational programming, in terms of accessibility, and in terms of affordability?
Yeah. That's such a big question. And I'll try to touch it in from many different angles. I think, and one thing that we had talked about, and I do want to try to connect it to this question, Angel, is kind of the framing of, it is the site, the venue, it's the Whitney Museum of American Art. So I want to have those discussions and those conversations, and the curatorial department at the Whitney is on the same page around what does it mean to be a museum that's supposed to represent the American experience. And we are very much aware that also includes its colonial histories. And so when we talk about the exhibition, the labels, the didactics, we don't shy away from using the word colony. It's an exhibition that also has a lot of information that I feel like sometimes we in the creative field were burdened of having to tell the history and all from 1493, all the way to the present before we can actually start talking about the art. But I feel we've hit a really great balance. You'll see it in the didactics when you come, of giving enough information, but also kind of telling you, without telling you, you should inform yourself and educate yourself more about this, and letting the artwork also speak for itself. So I think that I mentioned that because I think that's something that we're giving to the artists as a proper, fair contextualization to their work. This is also at a place and at a moment at the Whitney specifically, where we're thinking, and I want to link it, this idea of presenting colonial histories to our awareness of the lack of representation of Indigenous voices and experiences, and how showing perhaps the works of Indigenous artists from sovereign nations that fall now or overlap maybe somehow with the geopolitical borders of the United States, that's important too, while recognizing their sovereignty. So we are invested in this complicated idea of America, and unpacking it as much as we can, and definitely going against conservative ideas of what American means. But then more concretely to your question about accessibility, and there's so many great programs and events that we're planning, and I brought a list, but I don't know if I'll have time to go over all of them. Oh, before I say that, the question about the diaspora, that's another question where I spent a lot of time thinking of who is this exhibition for, and who is its primary audience, and what is the tone of the exhibition. Maybe I don't have to say this, maybe it's obvious. The average visitor is not a diasporican. Was I going to do an exhibition that is for the average Whitney Museum visitor? That I could have done that, but I that's not what I did. I think the diasporican experience is the main viewer that I was trying to go for in terms of the planning of, as I said before, there is information for those who, obviously I mentioned, themes like Ella, and I gave a very brief definition in one of the labels. It might not be sufficient for someone who has never heard of Ella before in their lives, but they can always Google it. And I say that a little facetiously because as an outsider, I feel like I'm always lost in these canonical references. There's so many gaps that I need to fill on a daily basis. So I'm not saying that the exhibition doesn't provide. In fact, it does provide its basic understanding, but it also recognizes that some people might need to meet us halfway, and might need to, be curious enough to leave the exhibition to learn more about the history of Puerto Rico. And sorry, I was going to say something else and I lost my train of thought. But yes, the exhibition, we're going to have a catalog. The translation of the catalog into Spanish will be available for free and downloadable from the website. That's important for people who want to show it or teach it in schools. Then there's so many programs. We have virtual talks with the artists. There's a lot of social impact programs, meaning verbal descriptions, tours in Spanish, and tours in English, of course. Tours led by someone from the deaf community, so not someone speaking and then ASL interpretation. So many things. There's also wanted to remind everyone, the museum has Pay What You Wish Day on Friday, 7 to 10. Anyone under 18 is always free, doesn't matter, always free. Students are discounted tickets, meaning older than 18. Yeah, there are tours for New York City teachers and students. There's a lot of things that I'm hoping we can put together in one document and share with the people who joined us today.
We will be happy to amplify and to share with our constituents the information that you put together. I know that keeps showing up in the Q&A that we prepared. We only have like 5 more minutes. Time goes super fast, but I do want you to have the opportunity to share, like give us a glimpse of what is it that we're gonna see at the exhibition. So I'm gonna share my screen so you can guide us to how the exhibit is gonna look like, okay? See how I do this. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Angel. This is just a peek, and you can see November 23rd to April 23rd, so it's 5 months. This is a painting that Angel and I talked about it the other day. He gave me some great insight into the work, and I just want these conversations to happen between people. You can go to the next. This is a book from where Raquel Salas Riveras from the Verse, and Raquel is one of the artists in the show. I want to make that clear. Fracture infrastructures is our first theme. Next. Critiques of tourism. Let's go against that tweet that Rosselló made in 2018 of Puerto Rico is a blank canvas for innovation. It kind of, that's a, in a nutshell. Next. Processing, grieving, reflecting, different histories, personal and more societal, I guess, of people who have lost loved ones and how that is also a catalyst for change. Next. Ecological histories and landscapes, different artists' takes on the landscape that go against, again, any cliches about the tropics that especially with Puerto Rico and the Caribbean that prevail. Next. Resistance and protests, this really special moment that happened in 2019. Daniel de Jesus, and we're collaborating with many of these artists for the audio guides, which are both in Spanish and English, and we gave them the choice to give their interviews in whichever language they wanted. But yeah, Daniel is going to be leading a teen project, not project, but kind of a course for teens. With Sterling Dupre, who was in the last biennial. You can see her performance on March 3rd, 4th, and 5th, so stay tuned for more information. And I always say I wish I could bring them all with me all the time, but I can't. So here are their beautiful portraits. Next. Here's more of them, and then the authors, and then the last slide is those contributions, reflections that I mentioned before. And that's the program on December 4th with the poets, and you can see the all the people that are included there. Willy Perdomo, so excited, so many great poets. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think that's it for today. We made it at 3:45. That's perfect. Thank you very much, Marcela. This have been a incredible opportunity for all of us. We can wait to go to the Whitney on the 23rd and celebrate with you this amazing presentation. Thank you everyone for connecting today. Have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you, Marcela.
Gracias, Ángel. Goodbye.